So I'm wondering if you have had your daily dose of data with your Easter morning breakfast. That's weird. But I ask you that question because we live in a time that is increasingly data-driven, increasingly analyzed, increasingly predicted. This is impacting our lives in all sorts of different ways. I marvel at the predictive ability of the weather app on my phone. We're in the habit of complaining about weather forecasters. I think this is kind of a holdover from an earlier time, because I don't know if you realize it, but so many times we'll look on there and the hour-by-hour forecast of when the rain is going to start and when it's going to get sunny is spot on. And of course, this is analytics-driven. This is data-driven. It has pervaded all kinds of areas of our lives, from forecasting trends in business, from looking at things like anticipating a royal birth. And for those of us who are sports fans, even in-game predictions about who's going to win. If I'm watching a sporting event and I happen to have an app up at the same time, play by play as it goes along, that little percentage will change of the likelihood of which team is going to win. Sometimes it even seems like I don't need to watch the rest of the game because I can just look at the data and know what's going to happen. But I mention these things because I wonder about what it would have been like on the morning in which Mary Magdalene and the others to whom Jesus was precious, what it would have been like as they set out to the tomb if there was predictive analytics at that time. What would the likelihood have been that they would have discovered Jesus not dead? I don't know if you have ever been to visit the grave of someone who has died who is dear to you, but I'm guessing that your expectation of the likelihood of finding that person buried or entombed in that grave on that day when you would go to visit is as close to 100% as just about anything you can predict. And it would have been on that day as well. And so you can imagine the shock that happened in the arrival first of Mary Magdalene to the tomb, because their day was already predicted. Their expectations for what would happen in that day were already well established. They were in mourning. They were going to grieve, and they were going for the same reason that many of us go to visit a grave site or an internment site, which is to try to feel a little bit closer to the one who is dear but who we can interact with no longer. And what happens when they get there sets off a series of confusing discoveries. If we look at this gospel narrative and think about what it would have been like to be there on that day, there is mass confusion, and it starts with Mary arriving and seeing the gravestone rolled away. All right, so if there was a predictive model, that would have never been in the model. But what we know also about that type of tomb is that the size of that stone was not one in which somebody who just has a big shot of adrenaline can just push it out of the way and go, let me in. And there weren't any heavy machinery or equipment at that time. And so imagine the confusion of going there and finding this tomb open. It kind of reminds me of the spontaneous exclamation of some people when we find something unexpected. It catches us up short, and our response is something like, wait, what? Wait. And there's that moment of just pause, of being put out of what we are expecting, where we're kind of like that deer in the headlights. What is happening here? What's going on? And so her reaction is to go back and tell somebody else. Don't you do that too when you encounter something that is not expected? You want to bring somebody else into it to check your perspective. Am I crazy? Do I see what I think I see? Guys, come. You're never going to believe this. And so they run, and the narrative says that there are two disciples. One is named and the other is unnamed, and the unnamed one gets there first. But then it says that the one who is named comes and goes in and passes up the one who got there first. Moment of confusion number 2. You get there and you're dumbfounded. This is not happening. Wait, what? And I can imagine that disciple just kind of standing there and staring at this scene that doesn't make sense. What am I seeing? What is happening? Where am I? And so the other disciple goes in, the one who apparently is just not confounded by seeing a gaping open tomb, and goes in there, and there's confusion. Moment number 3. There's these robes that Jesus was wearing that he was buried in, and they're there, but there's no body there. And the gospel even narrates that they seem to have been wrapped up really nice and neatly and put right on the bench in an orderly way, as if this was, somebody's plan. And so you would be standing there just unable to make sense of this scene in front of you. There is no data model that can help you in that moment about what you are facing. And so they go back out, and as is often the case in our world, the guy's attention span is shorter than the lady's attention span. And Mary Magdalene, that's true, yep, I hear you. And Mary Magdalene stayed. So for our Christian ears in 2019, knowing this story and knowing what brings us here today and knowing what a celebration day this Resurrection Sunday is, when we look at Mary's reaction, if we think about it in our own context, initially we might wonder, why is she crying? This is a good thing. But if you put it in the context of that time, this is the ongoing confusion. Not only is the body not there as they were expecting to go to the gravesite, imagine yourself in a similar kind of situation if you encountered an empty grave that was not supposed to be empty. You'd be really upset. You'd be really disturbed. And so she is, and it says that she is weeping, and then confusion moment number 4 comes along, and all of a sudden she's having this vision of these beings that are sitting kind of where the surface is that the body was laid, but it's not there anymore, and they're talking to her. I don't know if any of you have seen the new reboot of The Twilight Zone that is just starting again, but that's where we are. We're in the Twilight Zone. Who are these beings, and what are they saying? Why are you weeping? Why am I weeping? What, are you dense? Do you know what has happened? Why am I weeping? Because I can't process what's going on, and I'm in deep grief. And so they tell her that it's not as it appears, and she turns around, and moment of confusion number 5 occurs, where she encounters someone who the gospel says is Jesus. And if you had been that close to Jesus for several years, how likely is it that when he's standing right in front of you, you're not going to recognize who he is? But let's think about what happens to us when belief is suspended, when the things that are bombarding our senses don't make sense, and when the ways in which we have of comprehending our environment are failing us. All of a sudden, you get thrown off in everything. Things that would ordinarily be automatic and familiar all of a sudden seem to be confusing and strange. And so she's looking right in the face of this one and not recognizing him. And then he speaks. And all snaps in to focus. In the same way that when we hear our name spoken by someone who is important to us, that relationship snaps into focus. And he says, Mary. And she has heard that voice. He has called her name before. And it cuts through the confusion. And she's stunned. She's in disbelief, but now the emotional angst and how she's stirred up is starting to turn. And she greets him with a title of respect and a title of affection. And he tells her the beginning, just the very, very beginning of this miraculous thing that there is no possibility of having predicted in advance. So one of the great benefits of us living in a data-driven age is that we are coming to understand things on deeper levels than we ever have before. And we can drill down into statistics, and we can drill down into sample sizes that are immense and come to really process trends and developments more than we ever have before. But one of the things that comes along with that as well is that it creates in us this increasingly insatiable appetite to want to know what is going to happen next, to want to predict and to want to forecast, because along with all of this new data, we are also experiencing a pace of change that is accelerating. And so the patterns of our lives and the norms that we have become accustomed to are shifting in more and more places than they ever have before. And when things change on us, it creates instability. We want to reach out and be able to hold on to things that are stable, that we can know will last and will be there. And so predicting the future is one of the ways of trying to take control of what has not yet happened and to try to grasp it even before it comes. And so on that resurrection day, there was no way of predicting what was going to come. They had started to reconcile themselves to the reality that all of us have to live into when someone who is close to us dies, that we will not see them again. But that got turned completely upside down in their experience. There was no big data in that time. There was no data-driven analytics or predictive modeling. But what they came to realize in the days that followed the resurrection was that there was a constant in their lives that they had not expected in the way that Easter brought. The constant was the presence of God even through the finality of death. And we say that there are only two things in life that are certain. We've just come through this last week, one of them, on April 15th. And the other, we say, is death. But the Christian hope in the resurrection is in stark defiance of that second seeming certainty. And so I have one last statistic to leave you with on this Easter morning. In a time in which things are increasingly uncertain and in which we labor to the very best of our ability to analyze so that we might be able to understand changing realities, there is one certainty in your life and in my life and in our world that is borne out by this story of the resurrection. And that certainty is that the presence of God with those who seek God is unyielding. The statistic, as rare as it is in our modern experience, is 100%. We are 100% assured that God's unconditional love will not fail us. We are 100% assured that the model of life that Christ created for us in his life transcends a biblical story. We can be 100% sure that even though other things may fail us, even though we may be in the in-game app and the likelihood of our favorite team winning is 80%, that in those 1 time out of 5, our favorite team will lose. But being on God's team is never a losing outcome. And so I encourage you, in a time in which we are curious to know what will happen in the future, to hold on with great confidence and celebration to that 100% assurance that God is not only for us, but that God dwells with us, that God moves among us, and that God's care for us and for all of humanity is never ceasing. That in our present time is treasure indeed, and may it be a source of hope and confidence for you going forward in these Easter days. Amen.